being here. My name is Scott King. I am the president-elect of NATS, the Nebraska Association of Teachers of Science. This is our second session in the virtual conference that we set up during these kind of chaotic times. And I'm yesterday's session was TJ McKenna, and it was a fantastic session. Looking forward to hearing what our speaker today has, Kate Henson, who is from inquiryHub Biology, and her session today, Introduction to Teaching with inquiryHub Biology. Just a couple of quick housekeeping things as we get going forward. We have, it's kind of nice when you talk to Kate, or if you have a question for anybody, if we can know your name, maybe the state you came from. This is actually, we have two different countries, the United States and Mexico, are both going to be represented. All across the United States, it kind of helps us understand where you're coming from if we know where you're from, and also what grade level you teach, so answers can be kind of tailored. To avoid feedback and echoing and all that, we do ask that you mute your microphone unless you're talking. And if you are personally having some bandwidth issues, go ahead and turn off your own camera. Though I do love seeing all of your smiling faces, so feel free to leave them on. Some basic norms that we have here. You guys are here voluntarily for the good of your students. Nobody here was forced to be here, at least I hope. And I think that's very commendable that you guys are taking some time out of your day to be here, and just recognize that we're all here for that same purpose. And because of that, everybody's ideas are valid and important. Please share your knowledge and expertise and stuff in our chat. We will have a couple of board members from NATS on who can monitor the chat and help Kate out today. Any other notes that we have, or feel free to unmute yourself and ask a question. Of course, we're going to exhibit professional behavior, and we're going to be like a proton and stay positive today. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing and turn it over to Kate.
Great. Thank you, Scott. Thanks everybody for being here. In just a second, I'm going to share my screen and walk through some slides with you all. I'm going to try a couple of different ways to make today's session at least a little bit interactive. I know as a person who is experiencing what you all are experiencing, I'm home with my dog and my kids, my husband, and everything's a little bit crazy around here. And so you might be multitasking and listening in on this and not, fully present 100%, and that is great. So don't feel bad about, wherever you happen to be at in terms of those kinds of issues. We'll just all meet where we are in those instances. But if folks are able to interact a little bit more, I think that we'll all benefit from that. I'm excited to find out who's here and what your role is in your states and your schools. So please continue to fill that in the chat. And then I have a brief survey at the end of the session where I'll ask you voluntarily if you want to share some of that information with me. So also, please bear with me on any link sharing or any of those kinds of things. I hope that I have gotten all the permissions and everything set so you don't get one of those nasty messages that says you don't have permission for something when you click on it. I tried to go through everything, but if I miss something, please just shout out in the chat and I'll try to fix it. Okay. Here we go. Okay, so hopefully I'm sharing my screen and you can all see that. My brief introduction of myself: I'm a former high school biology and physics teacher. I got involved with doing some teacher professional development work and curriculum design work, and I ended up going and pursuing a doctorate in science education. And that led me to work with inquiryHub, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about our work, our program, and then our curriculum, and hopefully have a chance to dive into the questions that you might have. I noticed from who's here that I recognize some of your faces and some of your names. So some of you are familiar with the work that we do, and I see a lot of new faces and names. And so some of you may not have heard of our curriculum before. So I think that this is a cool opportunity to engage with people at all different kinds of levels, and hopefully, even if you're familiar with our work, you'll learn something new today. Oops. So how do oh, there we go. Figuring out how to advance my slides. So inquiryHub is housed out of the University of Colorado at Boulder, and we're considered a research practice partnership, which just means that we're really committed to doing research on teaching and learning in partnership with teachers and students. So the kind of old model of research was researchers come into schools and say, can we do this thing? We want your students to use this curriculum. We want you to give these assessments. Then we're going to collect the data and we're going to walk away and you're never going to see us again. And that is not the kind of research I was interested in doing. And so when we partnered with Denver Public Schools, it was truly a partnership where we said, what are the needs of the district? How can we meet those needs? What do we want to learn about how teachers and students learn in the context of science education, and how can we collaborate on that? And that's kind of how the partnership started, and it grew out of that. We have a lot of partners at this point, and we've done a lot of work with the folks at Northwestern University who manage the Next Gen Storylines that you may be familiar with that are elementary school. We do a lot of work with Open Syed, who does a lot of work with storylines in middle school. So we have partners all over the place, but we just have our inquiryHub curriculum that we manage here in Colorado while we partner with all these other folks. So what we're really committed to is co-design. And so I want to unpack a little bit about co-design. And the one thing I didn't do is I didn't share these slides in the chat. So I'm just going to actually pop out of actually, Scott, if you can hear me, you have that link. Can you drop the link to the slides in the chat for me?
Yep, working on it now.
Awesome, thank you. And folks, when you join later, if people join late, then they can't see the chat from before they were here. So sometimes you have to drop those links multiple times. That's a little bit annoying. Sorry about that. So there's a link to these slides. You can pop in here because there are links in the slides that you might want to access later. But I wanted to talk a little bit about the co-design process that we go through when we design our curriculum, because I've gotten a lot of questions about that. And in the notes section of the slide, I put a link to the Next Gen Science Navigators podcast that I did with Margaret O'Sullivan, who was a great contributor to science education. And she was really interested in learning more about that process. So there's a podcast that you can find out more about storylining, but I'm just going to tell you a little bit about what we do when we're designing curriculum, because teachers tend to just find it informative and helpful to know where the curriculum came from. So we start with unpacking the standards, and that's a big process in itself, and figuring out what all the big ideas are, what about the other dimensions besides DCIs with the SEPs and the cross-cutting concepts are in the standards that we're looking at. And then after we've unpacked the standards, and I actually should have had another step in there, before we unpack the standards, we bundle them. So we'll take a bundle of performance expectations from the NGSS that we sort of think kind of go together, and then we unpack that bundle. And once we have unpacked that bundle and figured out what all the big ideas are that are in the bundle, we start to generate what we would call candidate phenomenon. So they would be real world phenomenon that we think those big ideas might help us explain. And so we go through a brainstorming process where we think about all those phenomenon, and then we try to vet those phenomenon and make sure that we need to use all the big ideas from the unpacking to explain the phenomenon. And then we take the phenomena and we create a survey that we send out to students. And we've done this a lot in Denver with our partner district, but we've also done this across the nation with students all over, high school students who we survey about their potential interest and engagement. And this is one of the ways that we try to attend to equity. So we're looking to make sure that we're not excluding any kids, any particular groups of kids from the phenomenon, and therefore the curriculum, by selecting phenomena that don't resonate with them. So we survey the students, we come back with that survey data and analyze that data, and then we select the phenomena that based on the survey data seems to be the winner, and we try to build the anchor. So what that means to us is we try to build the anchoring phenomenon routine, which, if you're not familiar with that, we'll talk about that in a little bit, and pilot that anchor. So we do that with a group of teachers and researchers and district folks, and sometimes students are involved in that process as well. And once we've got an anchor that works, we develop a storyline that is the sequence of lessons that will be the unit that will give kids an opportunity to explain that phenomenon. We then go through the writing process. We get all the lessons written for the storyline. We pilot those lessons. We collect data on the pilot. We revise those lessons. We pilot them again, and we repeat that as many times as we need to until we think that the storyline is ready for widespread use. So we generally have a group of teachers from all over that come together and do this storylining process with us. And so that's how the biology curriculum was developed. And we're in the middle of finishing the inquiryHub chemistry curriculum right now. So that this process is still ongoing. We're in the pilot and revise steps 8 and 9 right now. And the pilot is a little bit iffy because there's no schools with students in them in a traditional way to do that pilot. So we're sort of thinking about what that means for us and how we can pilot in the state that we're at right now. So I actually just want to take a second and pause now and give folks a chance to populate the chat with any questions that you have so far. I'm going to stop my share and give folks a second to pop in any questions that you have about who we are, the storylining process, and anything else that's come up for you so far.
While people are writing, I'm just going to fill in a spot here. I tried using the iHub storylines this year, and I got through the evolution unit, and I thought it was fantastic. I had such a great community with my students. Unfortunately, I got switched to a 9th grade class and didn't get to finish them. So I'm looking forward to going back next year and trying them again.
Thanks, Scott. So I can share the survey. I can't do it right now, but I can share it later. I will, I'll share it through the slideshow. And if you don't see it later, you can email me for it. I did recently share it with somebody over email, so I know I can share it. It'll just take me a bit to track it down. Let's see. Oh, they're coming in fast. So are you writing multiple storylines for the bundles? So we typically write one storyline per bundle. However, if you're familiar with the biology curriculum, and if you're not, you can kind of look into this. There's each of the units in the biology curriculum has two what are called bends, 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 and no one's actually really sure why we called them that. So you can just imagine that. I think of it as both of the pathways are bending towards an understanding of an explanation that serves the same bundle of PEs. But those bends mostly have phenomenon that explain the same bundle of PEs. And in chemistry, it's looking a little bit different, and it's just kind of how it organically came out of the co-design process, that there's one storyline for each bundle, but the bundles aren't as large. So in biology, we have a couple of bundles that are pretty big, like in ecosystems, for example, it's a pretty big bundle, and both of the storylines address the bundle, but the first bend about the Serengeti is heavier on things like carrying capacity and sort of the ecosystem, and then the second bend about trees is heavier on things like photosynthesis and cellular respiration, but in total they kind of address the same bundle. Sorry, that was a long answer to that question. The chemistry pilot is going to be available. We expect a release for fall of 2021 for the chemistry year-long curriculum, unless we get slowed down by where we're at right now, because we had to cancel our in-person storylining work this summer, but we'll be continuing it virtually. So we'll just hope that we can get as much done this summer. So we have 3 units right now that were being piloted before school was closed, in-person school was closed. And so we're trying to salvage as much pilot data as we can at the moment, and just see where we're at. And we have potentially 1 to 2 units left to storyline. So there are some questions about the surveys, and the surveys I think are really interesting because we ask a lot of questions about how students identify gender, race, those kinds of questions in the survey, so that we can make sure that the phenomenon that ultimately gets selected are interesting to all students, and all students feel like it could be important to them and their communities, and that we don't exclude any particular groups of students from that by choosing a phenomenon that doesn't resonate with kids. And so the results are not always what I would expect them to be. When we initially did some preliminary surveying in Denver for chemistry, there were some ocean phenomena that came up, and we didn't think, a lot of the research around phenomenon says it should be local and relevant to kids' experiences in everyday lives. And we were thinking the ocean stuff that the kids wouldn't be that interested in when we surveyed Denver, and it came out as the top phenomena that kids were interested in, ocean acidification and all these kinds of things. And we were like, oh, okay, well, that's why we asked them, because we wanted to know. So I think we find out some surprising things. And so we are hoping, our goal for writing curriculum that's equitable is to make sure that all kids have an opportunity to engage with it, and that our goal in the end, as we analyze assessment data, is we hope we can't predict how any group of kids would perform on an assessment based on any of those categories like gender or race or any of those things. So we hope to create a curriculum where you can't say that a certain group of kids who identifies in a certain way would learn more or less by these measures. And so that's what our hope is as we go through the units and and create these. Yep, we're working on more. We're working on more chem storylines. So there's a question from Lisa Miles. Will chemistry be piloted for 9th grade and bio is for 10th grade? We created them just along the performance expectations, which are just for high school. So since these curricula are being used nationwide, we don't recommend a grade level for any particular, either the biology or the chemistry. Because we don't know what your sequence is going to be. So we've kind of made them grade level agnostic. And then one of the things that we're working on in current revisions, because we're always revising and improving the curriculum based on the data that we're getting from users, is we're working on some differentiated math supports. So we think that 9th graders who are in 9th grade math can access the curriculum, but if you're an 11th grader and you're taking biology, you may be able to do some additional mathematical and computational thinking that we wouldn't expect a 9th grader necessarily to be able to do. So we're working on building in some supports for those kinds of things to reach the different levels that we might be at, but that's, you know, kind of where we're at right now. Yeah, and the Open SciEd, so we work closely with Open SciEd, and in middle school, those follow the same trajectory. The chemistry unit, we did use, so we kind of split up the physical science standards, and we kind of took the ones that we thought were more chemistry-ish, although I think a lot of the ones around energy and things like that, you know, could go either way, and probably would end up in both. We also were a little more intentional with chemistry about including the earth and space science performance expectations in our bundles. So with biology, we didn't do that intentionally up front, and we sort of went back and figured out where there might be some alignment between them, but we were a little more intentional about that. So we've caught a lot more of the earth and space science in our bundles. And so we've got, you know, about half, I would guess, maybe the physical science PEs in there. Is it necessary, a question from Bethany Harmon, is it necessary to do both bends for every unit? Evolution is quite long, etc. So, so we think that to thoroughly hit all of the performance expectations, that both bends would be, I don't want to say required, but it's built in a way that for students to be able to build those full explanations, they would do both bends, but teachers are adapting it for ways that meet their needs. And to speak to the evolution unit feeling longer, I would totally agree with that. And some of that is intentional as we're building in the routines in that first bend of evolution for kids around you know, just all of the discourse and the investigations and all of the norms of the curriculum. The first bend of evolution goes a little bit more slowly because at the same time you're introducing kids to all of those norms and routines. Great. Okay, so if I missed your question, I'm really sorry. We can just put it back up there again, and if I don't get it, just email me. I will be happy to chat with you later, but I'm going to go back to the slideshow for a minute here, if I can remember where it is. Where did you go? There it is. Okay, now I just have to do the share screen button and we'll be back. And I have to say it's a little unnerving to just keep talking and get zero, like I can see some of your faces and some of you are smiling and nodding, but it's like zero feedback, no noise, nothing. It's pretty weird. So thanks for being here. I appreciate you all. Okay. So if you're not familiar with the curriculum, and even if you are, you might want to know more about an open access resource. So OER, Open Educational Resources, is kind of a movement across education, higher ed, to make resources, to sort of change the way we do school in terms of making resources free and open access for teachers and students. And hopefully we can shift the money that gets spent on traditional textbooks into professional learning opportunities. And that's kind of what we advocate for with our program and other open access resources I know do as well. Right now we're using Google Drive, and that seems to be serving our needs at this time for our housing all of our resources. And we've licensed them under Creative Commons licensing, which means that you can take those resources and you can save your own copies and adapt them how you want and need for use with your students. And we've created some resources to support you in making productive adaptations of those for your students. We've also embedded teacher support tools, which hopefully I'll get a chance to talk about in a minute, throughout the curriculum. So everything that we have is available free through Google Drive, and we have partnered with some vendors for printing. We've had a lot of schools, particularly rural schools, who have asked us for printable materials, and so that has been a need that we've been trying to help meet, and we work with a printer called Copresco, who was able to offer us really affordable rates. And then we also have been working with Kendall Hunt, and that's really helpful to schools who already have Kendall Hunt as a vendor in their system that they can purchase through Kendall Hunt. And they're doing those fairly, at it seems like fairly competitive, affordable rates. So through our website, you can find all the information about the printed materials as well. And if you're familiar with OpenSciEd, they're doing the same thing, working with Kendall Hunt, so they look the same as those resources as well. I've mostly already talked about, well, I've talked about a lot of these things, how we really focus a lot on equity and the research about teaching and learning to inform our work. And we really wanna help students connect to their communities through their science curriculum, and create inclusive classroom cultures. In this slide, there's a lot of links or a lot of references. They're not links, they're just references to a lot of research. If you want to know more about the research behind the teaching and learning, those are there for your reference. Most of you have probably been living in NGSS world for a while, but every state is a little bit different. And what kind of guides us in terms of designing an NGSS curriculum are these principles: the three-dimensional learning, the central role for phenomena and design challenges, the idea of incremental sense making and coherence from the student's perspective, which I'll talk about a little bit in just a moment. Support for equitable participation, opportunities for teachers to elicit and interpret student thinking, and support for teacher learning. So those are kind of the key principles that we focus on in our work. I'm going to talk a little bit more about incremental sense making and coherence from the student's perspective, I think, on my next slide. So this storyline approach, which again, you know, from Brian Reiser's group at Northwestern and the folks at OpenSciEd, taking these storyline approaches, is really based in the research and is really based on this idea of coherence from the student's perspective. So introducing the phenomenon before kids have all of the pieces, before they have built understanding of the core ideas, is how this approach might be different from curricula that has been designed in the past. And so we're looking for phenomena that are interesting and engaging enough to motivate an entire unit, and that creates a need to know for kids, so that kids are presented with a phenomenon, they're generating the questions that they need to answer to figure out how to explain the phenomenon, and they're motivated by their own questions to figure out each piece as they go along. So this idea of coherence for me was kind of revolutionary, because in my classroom, I did the opposite. I taught all of the pieces to my students, and at the end I asked them to put them together, but they weren't motivated. I knew why they were learning about cell membranes first, and then they were learning about cell transport after. But I bet they didn't know, because they weren't asking, they had no need to know about transport, because I didn't pose any questions that required them to think, how do things get across the cell membrane? So for me, it was kind of revolutionary to think about storylines, and I came to this work and was introduced to the idea of storylines, and just really knew that this was the kind of program that I wanted to work with, because this was the kind of teaching that I would want to take back to the classroom if I went back to the classroom. So that's why we really believe in the storyline approach. And there's lots of information out there on that you can read more about. And there's lots of videos of Brian Reiser talking about storylines that are really great. So you can definitely find more information about that. We've got in the biology curriculum 3 units: evolution, with our central question of why don't antibiotics work like they used to, with the 2 bends, and the second unit is genetics and heredity, with, again, the 2 bends about Duchenne muscular dystrophy and CRISPR. And the third unit, which is ecosystems, and those have the 2 bends around the Serengeti and around trees. And today my plan is to focus on the first unit, evolution. And I'm in these slides, I'm showing you screenshots from our Google Drive, and I've got a couple monitors going on here, so I'm not always looking at the camera. If you can still see my face, I'm sorry about that. I tried to put links in the headings that will help you figure out where I'm at when I'm in these slides. So I know it's a lot of stuff to navigate, but hopefully that will help you. So our format is that we've got these landing pages. So we've got a landing page for the whole curriculum, and then we've got a landing page for each unit. And this is what you're looking at here, is the evolution landing page. And the landing page is where you find everything that you need for the unit. It has the storylines, it has teacher handbooks, it has assessments and materials, and then it has all the lessons. So when you go into one of those bend folders, you'll see all of the lessons. And each lesson folder in turn then has the teacher guide, which is kind of like your lesson plan. It has student activity sheets for student-facing materials. It has slides, and then it has additional information if there's a reading or if there are supplemental materials for an investigation or something like that. There's lots of additional information in all of those folders. So that is what the landing page looks like. I'm going to talk a little bit about the anchoring phenomenon for the first bend of Unit 1, and it's a PBS Frontline video called Hunting the Nightmare Bacteria, and we use about 10 to 12 minutes of this video in our anchoring phenomenon. And so what kids are doing is they're watching the video, they're generating a number of questions, but I think one of the things that has come up for me as I've worked with teachers in professional learning contexts is that the assumption is that we watch the video and then we generate this list of driving questions and then we go do the unit, but we actually scaffold it a little bit more so that the questions that we end up generating as part of the anchoring phenomenon routine are a little bit more robust. And so what we do is after the kids watch the video, they make a timeline, they do some initial modeling, then they do a little bit of initial research, revise their models, and then they come together and create the driving questions board that will be the thing that guides the entire unit. So it takes about 2 full lessons for them to generate that driving questions board. And by going through that in a slow and scaffolded way, we find that kids really can generate the kinds of questions that will motivate them explaining and figuring out all of the pieces that help them explain the anchoring phenomenon. So in this case, one of the first questions that comes up for kids when they watch this, because they're teenagers, is, can this happen to me? Will I get sick from, you know, bacteria in this way, like this little girl did? And so we make sure to address that as part of the those first 2 lessons, so that we don't leave kids, we're not trying to scare them and make them anxious. So we answer that question first. Once they've figured out what their own potential risk is, then they can start to think about the big picture a little bit. So lots of you are probably familiar with this video and have seen it. I put the link in here. I didn't think it was probably a good use of our time together to have you stop and watch the video, but I did want to try something, and I hope that you will go on this adventure with me. We'll see if it works, because I haven't tried it yet. I'm going to skip this slide that kind of diagrams the anchoring phenomenon routine for now. And I'm going to ask you to come with me to the digital driving questions board and see if you have done this unit. Whoops, I can't do that. If you have already done this unit and you know what it looks like and the kinds of questions that kids come up with after they experience the anchoring phenomenon, you can post a question that kids have when they make their own driving questions board on that digital driving questions board, if you can make that work. And if you have not, if this is new to you, I put in the notes of this slide, and this is slide 17, a sample student driving questions board, which we typed up because it was hard to read all the sticky notes. So we typed them up and put them in the categories that eventually the kids organized them in. So you could take one of those questions off of the list and put it on the driving questions board. So I'm gonna go over to I'm gonna try to go over to the pinup board. Yay! Somebody has figured out how to use it. So in the corner, in the right-hand corner, you can add a new sticky note, or you can keep adding to the same sticky notes. There's a plus sign, and you can add a new sticky note and you can put your question on the sticky note. So I kind of wanted to take this opportunity to try over Zoom using this pinup board that I've seen others use, and kind of just see how it went. So thank you so much for participating in this with me. So you're either adding questions that you know kids have, or you can steal one off of that list that kids have had in other classes and put it on the sticky board if you want to give it a try. That's awesome. Yay. So you can do this in all kinds of ways. You could use this with kids if you're teaching virtually now, or if you're teaching face-to-face, oftentimes teachers want to mix up the driving question board routine and not do it the same way every time, and make sure that kids who aren't comfortable talking in front of the whole group have access to sharing their ideas. So this is just a different way to do this now in our unpredictable classroom settings, if you have kids that have technology available to them, but it would also be a cool way to do it in your classroom as well. And I know that there's people are using Padlet, people are using the Google one that I don't have access to, but there's all kinds of these boards. So I'm seeing these sticky notes like pop up and collapse, and it's very cool to watch. I'm going to go back to my screen, but I'm just going to take another minute to pause here as folks are playing around with the pinup board and adding questions and figuring out how to use that, to give you a minute to put any questions that you have at the moment. Nicole is asking about, is Jamboard free? So people are telling me that Jamboard is free and it's free to download the app, but I wasn't able to use it without doing a paid subscription based on the way that my Google subscription works. So if others have information about that to share in the chat that I don't know about, I wasn't able to figure it out to be free. I know a lot of people like Padlet, and this was one that I found through, I think it was through a Flynn webinar that one of our users pointed me to. So any questions that you have at this point, pop them in the chat and I'll just take a pause, have a sip of coffee, and answer any burning questions that folks have. Okay, you all are answering your own questions about technology. So smaller class sizes. So there's, how well does this work with smaller class sizes? Yeah, I mean, I think it really, teachers are figuring out all different kinds of ways. There was a Twitter thread a while ago where people were posting their different types of driving question boards that they were doing in different contexts with different classes. And so I know I recently did a teacher workshop with only 6 teachers, and it was really hard for us when we were in our student hat session to generate enough questions to fully populate the driving questions board with just 6 of us in student hat. So I mean, I think a small class can be a challenge as a large class can be a challenge. There's some sweet spot in the middle where, you know, it's perfect, but I think folks are finding different ways to use either, you know, Google Drive, some of these different kinds of technological apps to do things that are a little bit different if gathering around the scientist circle isn't something that works in your classroom. So if you have suggestions, please pop those in the chat. I'm sure that we can all learn from your experiences. And if you go back to Twitter, we can probably track down that thread where folks were sharing those kinds of ideas about how they've adapted the anchoring phenomenon routine to work for their classes. We have a lot of teachers in some of the schools I've been working with in Denver that are alternative schools and have really non-traditional school structure and populations and small class sizes and, you know, one-on-one instruction and online things. And so we're finding teachers that are making really cool adaptations. And so if you've got something to share, that would be great. And maybe this is really a good question to even pose again on Twitter and get folks to generate these ideas, but we might want to wait until everybody, you know, maybe summer is a better time for that, because right now everybody's worried about how they're going to get their students through the end of the school year as it is for them wherever they're at. Great. So I'm going to go back to the slideshow and I'm going to share my screen again, except it's not giving me a choice for my PowerPoint presentation. So let me try that again. Okay, there we go. So that digital, I'm looking on my other screen at your pinup board, and this was cool. So thank you for for adding stuff to this and playing around with this. And I really want to experiment more with this and other tools that we can use. So thanks for jumping in there with us. There's a question on the pinup board. How does this work with 28 students and 28 sticky notes? Yeah, so one of the things that we were talking about in our webinar series, the remote teaching webinar series, which if you haven't seen that, I can you can email me. I can send you an invitation to that. We talked about the anchoring phenomenon routine just yesterday, I guess it was, on that. And what some of the teachers in my small group were really talking about was slowing down. And you'd think that something that would be 1 or 2 lessons is going to take you 1 or 2 weeks to get through in terms of these kinds of things. So kids might be sharing all their ideas, and then maybe you are organizing them in the way that the teacher whose driving questions board I shared that Google Doc from, she had organized those into categories after the kids shared the ideas. Or you're assigning, a kid to do that, or you're assigning a group of kids to do that. You can have them rewrite the questions. So put all the questions that are similar on a single sticky note. I think there's all different kinds of ways to tackle it, but what the teachers that I was working with yesterday really emphasized was the piece of just slowing down and letting it be okay. Now, I know not everybody can let it be okay because everybody's under a different set of pressures and expectations from their schools and districts, but as much as you can let it be okay, I hope that you can. And I hope that it's not too stressful of a situation. I had a couple of examples of driving questions boards that I just stuck up here in the slide so you could see those, and later if you want to zoom in on those, you can see how the one on the left is actually for Bend 2 Juncos, and the one on the right is for Bend 1. And those are a little bit harder to see, but you can see how they started to organize them together and categorize them in different ways and make that sort of a living document. The next, so my time has gone so much faster than I thought it would. So I'm gonna kind of.
By the way, I don't care if you keep longer than an hour.
Okay, great. Then folks who, people will take care of themselves if they can stay or can't stay. And if everybody leaves, I will know that I should stop talking. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about the storyline. I had generated some I generated some activities for us to kind of work through, but I'm actually going to skip that because it just doesn't feel right from where I'm sitting right now to give that a try. But one of the things that I had thought about us looking at were the questions that come up on the driving questions board and how they match up with the questions that are in the storyline. And so this is just a screenshot of the beginning of the unit skeleton. And the unit skeleton is just like a nice summary of the storyline that doesn't have all the details in it, but it has nice pictures and easy to follow arrows and boxes and things like that. And so each row of the storyline that's kind of shown here in this unit skeleton has the questions, the phenomena or problems that kids are investigating, and then what they figure out in that lesson. And then you can see how it informs the next lesson. And so what we want is for the questions that the kids generate on the driving questions board to be the lesson questions for the whole Bend. So with the Bend 1 of evolution, kids are asking questions about what's going on in Addie's body. They're asking questions about bacteria. They're asking questions about antibiotics. They're asking all of the questions that later become the questions that they figure out the answers to through each of the lessons. And so I get a lot of questions about making having the curriculum be student driven. So driven by student questions. And this idea of, but I already have a plan for tomorrow and I already know what we're doing tomorrow. So how is it really student driven? And the answer to that is like here in the real world where you do need a plan for tomorrow because you have 6 periods of class and you can't make it up every 50 minutes from scratch as you go along. the real answer to that is the way that we developed the storylines and piloted them with kids is that we think that the lesson questions that are in the storyline are the questions that kids are going to come up with most of the time. Are there going to be questions that they come up with that are not on the storyline? Absolutely. And you can decide how you want to pursue those if you have a parking lot of questions that kids investigate later. And the driving question board, you know, really is an opportunity to have a living document go with you through the whole unit where you're adding and removing questions as you go through the unit, as you answer questions, as you think, well, that wasn't really the question I wanted to answer. I really need to answer this question instead. So by doing the piloting with kids and figuring out what questions they're going to generate, that's how we figured out what the lesson questions would be. And when it doesn't work out, you know, we go back and revise that. So it's not always going to work out perfectly 100% of the time. And again, if you have a situation where you have a really small class, you might not get all the questions, and you might have to supplement with something else to make kids think about the questions that they didn't think of. But in an average class size of 20 to 30 kids, we think that those are the questions that are going to come up in that. And so there's opportunity to definitely extend based on other questions that kids have, but we think that these most of the time will be the ones that work out. This is a screenshot of the storyline that just sort of goes into more depth on each lesson. So you can see all of the things that kids will really be figuring out, the details of that. And you can see that in this lesson, in lesson 5, but this raised a new question. So kids didn't initially have questions about the bacteria in their petri dishes and how they would grow, you know, exponential growth, because they hadn't thought about that yet, because they hadn't investigated that. So they're going to be bringing up new questions throughout the unit that they'll be answering through subsequent lessons. So lessons that aren't anticipated by the driving questions board are often motivated by a lesson in the storyline. Okay, so the full unit, as I mentioned, has each of those folders as we go through. And then I just wanted to introduce you to the incremental modeling tracker. If you're not familiar with this tool, this is something that's a really important tool in each of our units and each of the bends in the units. And they give kids a chance to track their growing understanding through models that they initially generate and then revise over time. And then those models are used in the end to generate a full explanatory model. And I have some examples, and I have another document I can share with you where we look more fully at, so this is just a screenshot of one student's final explanation. One of the lessons gives kids an opportunity to design a public service announcement and about educating their community about the proper use of antibiotics. And so this is one example of that from one classroom. And you can see, if you start to look in closely, how kids are making an explanatory model of antibiotic resistance through natural selection as they develop their models. And so if you went back to the performance expectations and looked at all of the big ideas and the 3 dimensions, we've got cause and effect, and we've got patterns, we've got developing and using models, asking questions, all of these 3-dimensional aspects you could find in here if you were to unpack these final explanations. I put links in here to all of the assessment documents, and you can peruse those later if you haven't had an opportunity to do that. But we think of having a full assessment system where we have daily embedded formative assessments. We have transfer tasks that help students apply what they figured out to new contexts. And then we have student electronic exit tickets, which require probably more words than I'm going to devote to them right now, maybe a whole other session, but there's lots of information in there about those assessments. I made us just a nod to the curricular routines, the anchored phenomenon routine, which we just talked about, the navigation routine, where we're focusing at the beginning and end of every lesson on what did we figure out yesterday and what questions do we still need to answer, so that the kids are really seeing that coherence between what they did yesterday and what they're doing today and what they're doing tomorrow in service of figuring out those answers to the questions that they generated themselves. We have an investigation routine, a problematizing routine, and a putting the pieces together routine. And the link in there will take you to more descriptions on those. I think maybe we'll do other sessions in the future where we dive into those. And the same is true about the discussion types. There should have been a link in here, but it's in the same document as the routines. Discourse is a major part of this curriculum: student-to-student discourse, student-teacher discourse, and it takes a lot of time to build the classroom culture that really supports this. And we have support built in through the lessons that will help you figure out how to support kids in this kind of discourse, and in the teacher guides as well. So some of those different kinds of icons you'll find in each of the lessons, where it talks about discussion strategies and how you might be able to support kids. And then there are other icons for differentiation strategies and those kinds of things. You'll actually see more of those coming in the updated version of the curriculum, which we release in June/July, late June, early July, that will have a few more of those kinds of supports for teachers as they go through. I'm going to just skip kind of to the end. If you're leaving, I have a brief survey that just asks you a couple questions, and if you have time to fill that out, that'd be great. It gives you an opportunity to add your contact information if you want to get email updates from us about our curriculum and what we're doing. And I have all my contact information on the last slide. You can reach me at inquiryhub@colorado.edu and any of these other virtual locations. And I'm going to stop talking and give a chance for folks to ask questions, and I will answer them. So take the survey if you can. I'm going to stop my share and check out the chat and just pop questions that are coming up for you in the chat. And yeah, keep answering each other's questions in the chat as well. So I'm getting a question from Tracy about informal educators. I think the challenge, I think, for informal educators, and you can correct me if I'm interpreting informal wrong, but I think the idea would be to pick off chunks of the phenomenon. So you're not going to be able to do, a long, continuous exploration, but you can pick off little pieces of the phenomenon and figure out what will fit into the time period you have. It's kind of, I'm thinking of it kind of the same way I think about assessment level phenomenon. So I'm going to, instead of having a anchoring phenomenon, I might have an investigative or a assessment phenomenon I dig into. It's a smaller chunk of phenomenon that requires fewer big ideas to explain it. So I would think about like chunking off a little piece, like how do bacteria grow, and just focusing on one little piece, or how do antibiotics work and focusing on one little piece. Oh, okay, my survey is broken. I made my husband try it last night. Apparently he didn't actually submit his response. Why does it say that? Okay. If that's the only thing I screwed up today, Nicole, I'll feel pretty good. So, yeah, why does it say that? If you know why it says that. Hmm. Pre-filled responses. You all know more than I do about this.
Kate, I put a new link in the chat. It should work now.
Oh, you're awesome. Thank you so much. It does say get link. Oh, thank you. So Scott put a link in the chat to the updated form. I appreciate that. Yeah, so is there any plan to offer digital training for July? So right now we haven't canceled. We've canceled a lot of our stuff for May and June. We haven't gone as far as July. That might be where we're heading. I remain optimistic, but we are working on developing an online combination of synchronous, asynchronous workshop. And so please stay tuned. I'll be blasting that out through our mailing list. So if you want more information about that, make sure that you join our mailing list. I think that that's going to be coming soon. Hopefully by the end of May, that will be ready to go. And that's going to be a version of our Inquiry Hub 101. Right now we have two different options for that introductory workshop, and we have a 2-day version and we have a 4-day version. And so the synchronous, asynchronous, virtual version that I'm working on right now, I think probably we would schedule it over a 4-day period and you'd have to sign up, and there'd be some commitment to doing some synchronous stuff with us in person, and then there'd be some stuff that you would do asynchronously through video and discussion board kind of thing. It doesn't feel realistic to have folks, in a chair at a computer for 8 hours a day doing professional learning. Everyone would be miserable, and it's not realistic for our lives right now. So that in-person 2-day, I feel like we would stretch out into a 4-day combined synchronous, asynchronous. That's probably way more information that you wanted, but it's really on my mind. I've been working on it for a couple of weeks, and I'm getting excited about that. Let's see. I'm seeing you all are answering a lot of questions. If I missed anything that you had, write it again so it comes out to the bottom. I'm just scrolling through here to see what other questions there are. Oh, nice. I think, Scott, when you when you do the recording, I think there's a way to save the chat too.
Yep.
I don't know if it does that automatically, but the chat has got some really great resources in it. So hopefully you all can access that later as well.
Yeah, we'll save the chat.
Great, thanks. How many classes do you currently have available? This is from Taylor. If I'm wrong about interpreting this, Taylor, we have the full year biology course and the full year chemistry course is coming. And we have planned on a full release of that for teaching it the fall of 2021. And we hope that we can still stick to that timeline. And it'll just depend on how we can collect pilot data. And our pilot teachers, we generally have not released units to anybody but our pilot teachers until they have been piloted and we've analyzed data and revised them, just because we want to set you up for success and we don't want there to be too many bugs in them. So we may get more flexible with sending them out before we sort of think that they're ready for prime time in this current environment, and have maybe some more informal piloting going. That's just an idea, but we're working on that right now. Great. So I guess I would just say, if you have questions, please reach out. I am a little slower at responding to emails right now than I typically have been in the past, but I have responded to them all probably within a day or two. So please keep sending your questions my way. I'm always excited to talk to folks about any questions that you have about the curriculum or storylines or phenomenon. So yeah, just please feel free to reach out at any point. Thanks, Lisa.
As we're wrapping up, Kate, if you have anything else, absolutely. But everybody, thank you for being here. Thank you for being part of our webinar series. Tomorrow we have Oki Lee, if you signed up for that one. Thanks for making it a success.
Thanks, Scott, for hosting. This was a great idea. Yeah, I really appreciate it. I'm going to just talk to Joanna's question here. If I can't see if you're still on, Joanna, but I'm going to assume you are somewhere here in my Hollywood squares. Yeah, I think one of the things that is coming soon are some additional pieces of guidance on productive adaptations. So we know everybody's context is really different, and we want you to be able to make what we think of productive adaptations that are adaptations that still keep you in line with the principles of three-dimensional teaching and learning. And we're working on helping to support you with that. And then, so you're saying that Massachusetts is more specific with content. We've worked a lot with the leaders at the state level in Louisiana, and they've created a supplement. So where they have kind of adopted NGSS, but adapted NGSS and have additional standards that are not part of NGSS, they created supplemental sort of little packets that, or packages that teachers could add on to the curriculum. And so I think that that's something that really needs to happen at the state level. And we're happy to work with state leaders on that. And I would just, yeah, point me to your state folks, and maybe we can open up a conversation about how we can support teachers in your context. But that's typically how that's been addressed at this point.
All right.
All right. Well, thanks again, Scott, and everybody stay safe and healthy, and we'll see you soon.
Yeah, thank you very much, Kate.
Okay. Take care.